Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to the Rattlecast. We're the biggest freewheeling live stream poetry podcast on the planet. In your ears, not in your laptops. Our guest for episode number 319 is Richard Gilbert. He'll be here in just a few minutes, but before we get, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been a continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do all this. We love poetry. I know you do, so please do click on that like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. Leave reviews on Amazon or iTunes or Spotify. Wherever you're listening or watching to this, there's something you can do to help spread poetry around the world, and that's what we're asking of you right now. Now, we're going to start out like we always do with our Poets Respond poem, and we have two poets this week. We have a special bonus poem for Thanksgiving coming up as well. We're going to preview that. But first, let's go to Alexandra Umlas, a familiar face, my guest back from Rattlecast number, I don't know what it was, 9 maybe, and a frequent poet responder over the years, Alexandra Umlas. Hey, how you doing, Alex? Yeah, it's great to have you. Yeah, great to have you back. And this was one of those poems that, everybody started talking about this. And we have kids in school, like middle school and high school. And so we've known about this 6-7 thing for a long time. But explain, it sort of reached the collective adult consciousness, which just means like that's the last phase of the, it's the final act, I think, of the drama. Once the parents start, all you need is like some parents to go 6-7, and then we're just putting it to rest. But for now, it is at the surface of our attention. It's a New York Times article about it too. So when did you first come across 6-7, and what do you want to say about it before sharing the poem?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I was a little worried. At first I was thinking that you were going to ask me to explain it. And I was like, oh no, what am I going to say? Maybe it was when it first really caught my attention was when they were playing those in and out videos, like those in and out reels, where all the kids are waiting around for them to say 6-7, and then the whole in and out place goes crazy. And I was like, what is this? Like, it's really interesting. And then, yeah, it's sort of a fascinating thing. And I loved that my student last week compared the Mona Lisa to 6-7. And it really got me thinking. I'm like, yeah, she's sort of right about this. And it opened up a whole other part of our discussion that was really fun. So
yeah, well, it's a really fun poem that you could do this with poetry and like come to make sense of it, which I think this does more than any article I've read or heard about it in poem form, no less. Do you want to go ahead and read this poem?
Sure, thanks. Teaching the 20s in 12th grade Humanities, or 6-7. Everything is roars. The auto, the crime, the market, the dress across the floor, the jazz, the market crash. The flapper, they want to know more. Each age has its slang, its giggle water, whatever they consider the cat's pajamas, what they'll pay a clam for, if it's the real McCoy or just applesauce. We try to understand, but there is so much we don't. Just when we think we are on the trolley, just when we know our onions, just when we are seeking truth, Eliot comes along, or some other thing to say, that is not what I meant at all. That is not it at all. We still don't know so much. Why we go to war, what that lady we call the Mona Lisa is really thinking. It's like 6-7, says one student, and suddenly they are laughing because they've just set one of the greatest poems in the world, one of the greatest works of art side by side with two numbers that represent everything and nothing at all. Meaning upon meaning, meaning piled, meaning too many things, and so nothing at all. Why, they want to know, do we feel as though everything needs to be explained? Frost was right. All the fun's in how you say a thing, or two numbers, side by side, juggled just because, the magic trick, the inside joke of a generation that has learned how to make meaning out of what is meaningless.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's definitely, what it's all about with the 6-7. I don't know. I asked a long time. I don't know when it was, like a month ago or two, where it appeared. I asked my son like what that was all about, and he showed me the video, which he thinks is the original video. Now he's wondering if maybe there's other videos, but it was some kid at a basketball game making a goofy face and saying that, which sort of went viral. And I think maybe it has to do with like one of the players. This is my son's theory, that one of the players like bragged about being 6'7", but then he like got, schooled in the basketball move or whatever. And that's what it was about. But who knows? It's just
and then apparently there's a song too, and so I love that there's all these origin stories.
Yeah.
And does it really matter where it came from, right?
Yeah. No, it really doesn't. It's just and the fact that it's meaningless is what makes it have meaning, which is such an interesting thing to think about, and why they like to mess with us so much, those kids. Anyway,
totally.
Well, thanks so much, Alex. It's always a pleasure having you on and having a new poem from you.
Tim.
Yeah, take care.
All right, see ya.
Yeah, that was Alexandra Umlas with the Sunny's poem on Rail.com, teaching the 20s in 12th grade Humanities, or 6-7. And now we're going to have a preview of our Thursday poem coming up soon. Now, Thursday is Thanksgiving in the States, and normally we do an extra bonus poem on Tuesday, but we figured this is a sort of Thanksgiving-ish poem, and it would be great to put that right on Thanksgiving. And the poet is a poet who's been on Poets Respond before, has joined the Rattlecast in that capacity. Thomas Mixon is here. Hey, Thomas, how you doing?
Hey, good. Thanks for having me. Happy early Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to you. It's great to see you. It's always a pleasure. You send a lot of Poets Respond submissions over the years. It's wonderful. And they're always so interesting and go in different places, and you're always experimenting. They're really fun to read, and it's just great.
Thank you.
When you get to pick one. I think it's maybe your fourth time on or something like that. And this one coming up is about something that I remember but hadn't thought about in a long time too, which is the kids' table. So tell us where this poem came from.
The kids' table. Yeah. I mean, I was at it every year at my grandparents' house, and then it just vanished out of my everyday thoughts for years. We don't do it now. It wasn't even a discussion now to whether to have a kids' table or not. It just was even going to extended families' houses. It was just the kids were always there. But I heard something on the radio about a debate about the kids' table. Do you still use it? What does it mean? Are our parents trying to escape to the kids' table to get out of having fraught conversations during the holidays? And then it just all kind of came back to me, remembering all of that. And then remembering a moment that, I wouldn't call this poem autobiographical strictly, but I did have an incident where very sad baked goods fell off the roof of a car as I was driving away from a family event, and did go back in afterwards to ask for a second plate, which was just not the right thing.
Yeah, well, let's hear this poem. It's going to be Thursday's poem.
Sure.
The kids' table is first to go. Why don't you go ahead and read it?
Thanks. The kids' table was first to go. Then sippy cups. Then Velcro shoes and shirts with snaps instead of buttons. Then you were different on weekends. Then sacred bedtimes died, and doors, forever cracked, were closed. And the music grew louder, and towels held wetness for longer and longer. Then we showed up separately, and were given to-go boxes, even if we didn't want to go. Then we wanted to go, slowly fastening our fancy coats to prove a point to no one but ourselves, suddenly alone in the driveway. And packaged cookies on the roofs of cars with more room than we knew what to do with, as we drove away, falling past the headlights, spite of night, onto gravel. Then the disconnected stones. Then the place that wasn't home.
Yeah, just emotionally powerful poem. The kids' table was the first to go. And for me, we had a kids' table at the various grandparents' houses. I was always trying to escape to the adult table to talk about like politics and stuff. I always thought it was very cool where I could like creep in on what they were talking about. But that division, it is interesting the way that our culture has changed when it comes to kids. It's like that sort of paying attention, being up in their stuff all the time, I think, that leads to no kids' table, and a fascinating development to notice too, I think. Thanks for sharing that, Thomas.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Yeah, once again, that was Thomas Mixon with The Kids' Table was first to go. That'll be our Thursday poem on rattle.com. If you don't get your poem by email every day, all you got to do is go to rattle.com, find the email at the bottom of any, or the box at the bottom of any page, put your email address in there, and then you'll receive the poem of the day too. Also, if you have any poems about current events, all you have to do is find the Poets Respond page, upload your submission there by midnight every Friday night. Anything about the events that took place over the last week are fair game. Anything you want to respond to poetically, submit your submissions there, and we'll publish at least one every Sunday, sometimes two. So hope you do that. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Richard Gilbert. So sit tight and we'll be right back with a whole lot more poetry. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. Like I said, today's guest is Richard Gilbert. Richard first appeared in episode number 6 of the Rattlecast way back in 2019, pre-pandemic. He earned a Ph.D. in Poetics and Depth Psychology at the Union Institute and University in 1990. In 1997, he moved to Japan to pursue Japanese haiku research. He's currently associate professor at Kumamoto University. His most recent book, Haiku Language Thought, explores haiku as the essence of poetic consciousness. It was going to be fascinating to talk about. Here he is, Richard Gilbert. Hey, Richard, how you doing?
I'm fine, Tim. Nice to see you again after how many years? 6 years almost.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been 6 years. And I just, part of it is too, I just listened to that first episode we did together in the car back. Me and Katie were driving back from Austin and had some time to just sit back and listen. And the technical side was rough, but the conversation was amazing. It was the episode 6, and I hadn't figured everything out yet as far as like audio cleansing. And still, it was really fun to listen to because it's so interesting what you have to think about and write about. And your book, Haiku Language Thought, is an update of Poetry as Consciousness, the original book, with new chapters, more haiku examples. To start out, let's sort of frame that, because we've talked about haiku so much on this episode, or on this podcast. We've had, I think, maybe a dozen or 10 or so haiku poets. We always cover that haiku is not 575. It's something more. It's something different. And we show a lot of examples, talk about it, but there's something even deeper to haiku, where, and me and Katie have felt like this and talked about this a lot too, that haiku is sort of somehow the essence of the thing that poetry is. And maybe that essence is metaphor in the way we think and approach the world, but it is like the most discrete unit of whatever that conscious space is. And that's what this book is about. And so how do you think about haiku from that respect?
That's a really easy question to answer. I can probably do it in a sentence. Just kidding. I don't know. I think that's part of what keeps me involved in haiku research and writing. I have this deep appreciation for the form, and I don't really know where it comes from, because other than haiku, I tend to read book-length poems, like Sunstone by Octavio Paz, or Guidobro Altazor's, I don't know if you know Altazor. I really like long poems. So it's a bit mysterious why I'm drawn back constantly to excellent haiku. I think there is something to be said for this idea that comes from depth psychology, from particularly James Hillman, who was one of my mentors, that the deepest source of consciousness that we experience subjectively is metaphor. So that if you try to describe a metaphor, the only way to describe the metaphor was with other metaphors. Like if you try to explain Homer's the wine dark sea, and you say, well, what does that really mean? And so wine dark means what? Is that bloody? Is it the wars? Is it just the color? And what kind of sea is it? And you can go on, and the more you explain is the further away you get from the feeling of it, from the powerful sentiment. And so there's a feeling level, cognitive level, and metaphorical level. And I think it's the mystery of that you can touch it, and it, as you just pointed out, it's incredibly deep. And is it the essence of I don't know, essence is a philosophically funny word to say, but I do feel that there's something essential. And it does draw me into some of the best haiku. And one of the terms that I have drawn on in this enlarged or newer edition is this idea of cognitive metaphor versus figurative metaphor. So we're used to figuration, or we're used to literary metaphor, where something is, what is the famous Shakespeare line? Juliet is the sun. Mm-hmm. That I'm not sure. I'm probably misquoting it, but that would be a very simple and way to look at conceptual metaphor, because we know that Juliet isn't the sun literally, and we think of that as kind of figuration. But there's another aspect to conceptual metaphor that's more linguistic oriented and pretty much related to newer research, where we use conceptual metaphor all the time in daily language, so that this idea of metaphor isn't just reduced to like haiku or how we use it in poetry. And I just want to give one example. It's been just tossing around in my mind, and I hope I don't offend too many people with my meat eater's metaphor, but it was this idea of where I'm talking with a colleague and it's lunchtime, and I say, oh man, I'm really starving, I'm peckish, and I'd love to hunt down a great burger. This is just something that popped into my mind. I thought, if you break that down, that sentence, there's so many little parts of it that are metaphorical. Like hunt down, like what does that really mean? And if I say great burger, like that means something to me. You might actually be vegetarian, for instance, and it would kind of upset you, but it's my thing. And so what is great? I mean, is it like thick or juicy or thin, or, am I talking fast food or expensive restaurant? And you go on with this. And so there actually is this metaphorical layer with our nouns and with our phrasal constructions that is just so continuous in our language. And it was Yuval Harari who pointed out that this is called, he used the term intersubjectivity, that we consensually agree on all of these aspects of our reality. So we don't think of these things as metaphorical; they're just accepted as true. And he gives a great example of money. He said you can't eat it, smoke it, taste it, or drink it, but we all conceptually accept that it's real, but it actually isn't real. But anyway, I think that the wider framework of this idea of conceptual metaphor is very poetically expansive, and it makes progressive haiku quite interesting if you're willing to kind of open your framework of metaphor to this wider idea of possible usage. And I think that the more challenging or reader-resistant haiku really pushed it. They pushed the limit of where the conceptual metaphorical could shift into almost nonsense, and that's probably the range limit, or also the, how would you say, tension between a more traditional idea and what I tend to more go for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's that thing we talk about in poetry. Accessibility is one of the things, but there's this concept in haiku that you call disjunction, which is that leap between two things, and there can be things with a large, strong disjunction, and a smaller, lighter disjunction, but the basic structure of the haiku is having two things, connected in some kind of disjunctive way, and so it's really interesting to see how far that can go. So can you talk a little bit more about that disjunction and how, I don't know, I keep getting this like weird metaphor in my head where about resistance to a gap being what creates like the spark, like having a big gap is what the spark has to leap across to let the electricity out. And that's the kind of that gap inherent to all haiku is like staring like at a spark plug or something, like the tiniest unit of measurement of poetic meaning or whatever it is. And it has to have that gap. And sort of the bigger the gap, the bigger the spark, the bigger the discharge, and there's something to that aspect of it that makes some haiku great.
Okay. I like to offer a slightly different view of disjunction because the idea of a haiku having two parts is actually itself pretty limited. I think that's seen in the past as almost a demand. In modern haiku in Japan and also in English, there are many haiku that are called fragment phrase style, where then there is a kireji, meaning a mark of punctuation or lineation or other word. In Japanese, it's usually a word like ya or keri or another word that is actually indicating this cut. But there are other haiku that are disjunct between every word, or they're just disjunct, as I was kind of talking about more before, conceptually, metaphorically disjunct. There's also an idea of psychological disjunction, where I termed it in the book, misreading as meaning. You read the poem and it seems to make sense immediately, but then you realize that it doesn't quite say what you thought it said, and then you read it again. And they're so short that you continually read but also misread, because the meaning never quite is one thing. Mm-hmm. And that kind of disjunction more is a coherence and decoherence that happens cognitively or in your own reading experience, and it never really ends. So you could say that maybe a really excellent haiku never really ends because it doesn't really come down to a singular meaning at all. There might be multiple ideas of it, and in that sense it's always sort of disjunct, right? If you see what I mean. It's always a bit, what is that? That is part of what I term mystery. It's better maybe if could I draw on like some actual experience examples? Otherwise, I think it gets.
Yeah, I was just about to ask if you could pull up the ones that you sent.
Well, there's one that occurs to me. In the poems I sent you, the first group is from the appendix in the book, which is on what we're talking about. It's on the difference between weakly disjunctive haiku and strongly disjunctive, and I can kind of give some couple of examples of those maybe.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
That'd be interesting, I think. And I like to do, so weakly disjunctive just means that this aspect of, as you said, the distance, the gap between, I like that idea that you said, the distance between, if the gap is wide, the spark, it's harder to spark, but when it does spark, it's really big. And that might be termed reader resistance or something like that. But then a weakly disjunctive haiku, my point was in talking about that there is no difference or evaluation, better or worse, in excellence between something that has a strong disjunction and a weak disjunction. So this is a poem by Wayne Runningbuck Hunt, and these are all pretty new. I think this was published in 2021. And the poem is Miles from Home. Let's pretend it's not us tonight. Miles from home, let's pretend it's not us tonight. How do you relate to that?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking, the first thing that comes to mind is like that idea of driving and seeing something happen, maybe like a car accident or something like that, that like something, had happened, and then pretending, it's not. That's the first impression that I get. But then there's also, then that moves into a different sort of impression with that one of kind of like, let's pretend it's our first date kind of thing too, like that vibe to it. So it does have these like layers of what it means to me, I guess. And it doesn't really resolve on either one, I think, as I read that one.
I actually had a very similar impression as you, especially that of a car trip. It's like I relate to it as a road trip, a road poem in a way, because the miles from home, you think of, just being distant, but then there's this relationship, because it doesn't say we should pretend or why don't we. That's what's missing. So that because the disjunction aspect is really the omission of prosaic language. So this has this poetic compression that's important to haiku. And this is a case, I wanted to bring up this poem because although you could say that there are two parts to it, in another way you can just read it as one line. It's like a dialogic poem, because you feel like the person is really speaking this to the other person in the car who's like their lover or partner. And that seems to come through pretty strongly in the poem. And how do you know that? Well, let's pretend it's not us tonight. So, and it sounds like let's role play, let's just start over, or there's some issue here, but it could be very romantic. Let's be other people. We're far away. We're on a road trip. So let's we can let go of our habitual identities, that kind of feeling. So there is sort of a deeper level, or even it could be a relationship conflict level, but it could also be really romantic. And that's what I really enjoy about haiku, that they don't give you that answer. It's they're all true. Mm-hmm. The car crash one I didn't get, but I as like we always have these different impressions, and you have to be able to accept them all. Well, okay, now let's go. I'd like to go to a strongly disjunctive one, or I consider more strongly, and I'd like to look at two or three. Well, I had three that I sent. But first, could we look at the middle one? It's by Scott Metz. Mm-hmm. This one is really visual. It would be, I don't know if you can put it up on the screen, but it's really interesting to look at because of the unusual layout.
Yeah, I have these for the YouTube folks. I have this on screen for them. So. Oh,
okay. If for those who are listening, I just want to explain. I'll read it. I'll try to read it, because this is a case where, how do you read it? Exactly, because it starts with a period, and then there's two spaces, and then a capital letter, closer for closer. That's the first word. So you can't speak the period. So what that period is disjunction. It's actually a cut in haiku. So the punctuation aspect of it is really strong, and there are two periods, and one is at the beginning of the poem, and one is toward the end, but not at the end. So the poem is in 3 lines, and the first line is closer to her, flowering, closer to her.
Yeah, and it's an interesting, but I don't really know what to make of that one. And it feels like it goes. I mean, my impression is that it's in a loop, like you never quite get there. I think maybe. I mean, that's if I stretch. You really have to stretch to find meaning in poems like this that have this much just disjunction, as you say. But I imagine trying to get closer and closer in some romantic relationship, but never quite getting there. And so it being like a loop, because you kind of read because the periods at the beginning, it sort of implies to me that it's like in a loop going around and around and around. That's how I read it. But I have no idea.
Actually, Scott Metz is really influential and important in the haiku world, partly because of his collaboration with Lee Gerga, and they do the annual haiku it has the year, Haiku 2024, Haiku 2025, 100 haiku poets and 100 poems. And they've also just produced Haiku 21.2, 2025 came out in, I think, August. And, that's I don't know how many, I think there's might be 600 or more haiku in there. They're collected over a decade, the last decade up to, I don't want to misquote it, but recent haiku. So they're great books for people who want to get or who have an interest in more progressive haiku. That's the Modern Haiku Press publication. So Scott and Lee are very colleagues and friends, and Scott is probably one of the more certainly objectively experimental poets, and so this is one of his relatively more recent structures of haiku. And I'd like to read it without any of the punctuation, just to read it as if the 3 lines of text were there. And it reads like this. It just reads, closer to her, flowering, closer to her, or closer to her, flowering, closer to her, like that. And so it's just a very simple repetition, and it just means what it says. So on that level of just the words, the overt text, it's a deeply romantic feeling, and the simplicity and the repetition with the word closer repeated, her repeated, and then the flowering is in the middle. So that I think that is the beauty of the poem, that the flowering, that verb of blooming and blossoming is lovely. However, because of the periods in it and the cuts that are unexpected, it's savage. It's harsh, and so each one to me feels like no or not, but I can't, and it isn't, and ouch. Mm-hmm. And so this nonverbal aspect of it, and this highly disjunctive aspect of it, doesn't let you quite lean into the romantic, in a superlative way, but at the same time, it does mean what it says, right? So this is a real push-pull, mm-hmm. and puzzle, kind of a puzzle. So I find, though, that the imminence in the poem, it's almost non-narrative. It's some kind of moment of completely embodied experience, and I think the word embodiment or embodied is really important in terms of cognitive metaphor, because it could sound very abstract. And that's also a criticism sometimes of these kinds of poems, that, it's really, hard to understand, and it seems really like you're just playing with language. But I think here, it's incredibly embodied. It's in the middle of this relationship that feels very intimate. At least I take it that way.
Yeah. Over on the YouTube chat, Odd Writings points out that he just realized the word ring, is also in the word flowering, along with flow, both subconsciously bringing in the thought of of looping. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. And also, the ERs of closer, her, the assonance, the internal rhyme is there. Okay, well, can I read one more?
Yeah, please do.
To what? So this is another, you would call it more strongly disjunctive haiku, and this is in 2 lines, which we don't see quite as much as the 3-line form or even the 1-line form. And these 2 lines they're centered up above and under each other, with a space between that is somewhat undefined, but let's say it's at least two lines of space. So that's a disjunction, objectively or in layout. So there's immediate question is, are these almost like 2 separate thoughts, or how do they connect? That would be part of the layout. And the first line is, lonely for the empty, mirror desert wind. And that's the haiku. This is by Sabine Miller, published in Haiku 2024. So it was published a couple years ago. Lonely for the empty, mirror desert wind.
Yeah, well, that's another one. These ones leap far, and it's difficult to resolve. I think there's different ways you can kind of read it and interpret it as being 2 halves of a whole. like those are three things maybe as a list: mirror, desert, wind, which are lonely for the empty. Like they're things that evoke emptiness as an idea. Like they never, like nothing's in the mirror except what's outside the mirror. The desert is empty. The wind is only what blows it. So there's this sense of that they're the conduit and not the actual thing or something for each of them. And then there's a loneliness to that, even though they have to exist. They sort of have to be empty to exist. And so the parallel of that is maybe what I see there. But it's a stretch trying to think and imagine what that might mean.
But let me ask you something.
Mm-hmm.
What is your emotional feeling? Just get out of the whole intellectual side of it.
Yeah.
What is there a feeling to it that you receive?
I mean, it feels to me lonely because of the emptiness. It's a sort of a haunting. There are things that, like a desert wind itself just feels very devoid of life.
Right.
Yeah. So
dry and
yeah,
dry and maybe not lifeless, but reminds me of like Elon on Mars or something. It's like, okay. I wanted to mention about this poem. I have a very strong emotional reaction to this poem, and I can't explain why exactly, but the first line, lonely for the empty, it has this double meaning because it means I really want that. I'm lonely for that, what that is. So in that way, it could be this deeply contemplative, emptiness or shunyata or whatever. But then it could also mean lonely because of the empty, as a causal aspect. This is because of this emptiness or lonely feeling. I'm extremely lonely, like I'm isolated or isolate feeling. But then mirror, desert, wind is also very interesting because does it mean like if you imagine looking into the mirror, that there is a mirror, and it could be that you're living in the area outside of, in the desert area, let's say outside of Palm Springs or something, and there is a desert, and you're in that. I happen to know that this poet has sometimes lived in very dry climates like that. But I happen to know that, but I do feel that this is actually coming from some kind of environmental experience, but I also think it's an internal experience. That desert wind could be happening from looking into the mirror. And I don't know about you, but if I really look into the mirror directly and look at the pupils of my eyes, it really freaks me out sometimes. It's like, who is that? There's just black. You can't see yourself. You can't see the self of yourself. Mm-hmm. And all of that is sort of wrapped up for me in this very unusual haiku that, notice it's dialectic, right? In a way it's dialectic. It seems to split off these two lines, but they also, it feels like a real experience. So again, embodiment is present in emotion, in my experience, even though it's a very abstract poem just in terms of the text. And okay, one more, if you don't mind. I don't want to waste too much time, but you have to tell me to shut up if I need to. This one is by Jennifer Hambrick, and it was the third poem in this series of strongly disjunctive poems. And it's a very different kind of poem than the first two. And I'm not quite sure how to read this poem, but it is more like a fragment phrase poem. And the first line, whale fall, my ocean's quiet depths. Whale fall, my ocean's quiet depths.
Yeah. Well, for this one, and I think this is less sort of confusing. I think maybe I'm using confusing as a synonym for strongly disjunctive now, because this, I think it's pretty explainable. It's the a whale fall, and if you know what that is, which is that it's sort of similar in an interesting way to windfall, But in the ocean, if a whale falls, all the creatures, it dies. All the creatures in the bottom get to feast for a while when they find this huge whale. And it's like this banquet that lasts for a very long time and nourishes the entire bottom level of the ocean. So that's the whale fall. And then that my ocean's quiet deaths, which is a homophone almost for depths, which is what you
Right.
expect. The ocean's depths, instead it's deaths. But the whale fall is a death. And it really rings, I think, strongly and sort of clearly to me as those like moments that are quietly really impactful and really sad is the feeling I get from it. But those like sad moments that don't appear on the surface, that nobody else understands, but it's this huge bounty of like emotion hidden in the quiet depths of your soul, but it's also what poets feed on too. So there's that layer as well, almost, of Ars Poetica aspect to it too. So there's a lot you can go, but none of that feels, and this is what I wanted to ask, seeing this set of three, like none of that feels as sort of elliptical and I'm lost as it does with the other two poems here. So why do you see this as strongly disjunctive in the similar way that the other two do?
I think that my ocean's quiet depths is highly metaphorically conceptual. Because if you start asking, well, you gave a wonderful explication, and I can relate to that. But at the same time, when I think of my oceans, I think, what is that? What is my, for a human being, like, what does it mean, my oceans? That's pretty out there. And for this poet, what could that involve, my oceans? It's like, it means like everything, or the unconscious, or, it's hard to say. Is it archetypal? We don't know. And what, the ocean is everything. It's calm. It's, heaving and briny and ravaging, but it's also primordial. So, and why quiet? What's the quiet part? Well, the whale fall happens where we aren't able to witness. That's what part of the interest of whale fall, that it's in the deep ocean, and the depth of the deep ocean is such that actually it's extremely, even scientifically, there's very little, how would you say, experimental direct evidence of whale fall. We know it happens, but we're not there for it. Mm-hmm. And so there is this side there of that invisibility, but as you put it, the bounty. I love where you said it's poetic bounty. Like, we can feed on this poem, it's nourishment, and that's an interesting light to the poem, where the pain or tragedy or common tragedy of our lives gets, enters into a poem, and then that becomes nourishment. It's sort of our pain or travail often ends up, being very, very helpful and enriching for other people, and that is definitely in this poem. So, yeah, I think it is both. It could be read very simply, just directly. Oh, right, there's a whale fall, and there's death, and I have these quiet, tragic experiences, and they're silent, and in some way they're nourishing because I wrote the poem. But then there's this other side where, how are these things relating together, really? What is the experience of this poet, actually? And it's quite mysterious. So I think, like Scott Metz's poem, Closer to Her, Flowering Closer to Her, I actually think it's in a very different form, but I see them as disjunctively having a lot of power in terms of there's a mystery in there. Mm-hmm. And the deeper you go, is the more odd it seems, the more strange it is. So there's so-called alternativity in this poem, Mm-hmm. But I love the ecological aspect of the poem very much, and it, no matter what the poem means, I love whales. I think most people do. And when you think of whale fall and how that, the most massive creatures on the planet, and you think of them dying in the middle of the deepest parts of the ocean, invisibly, and then becoming a feast. They actually create their own ecosystem for like a decade or two, right? Mm-hmm. It's just an amazing miracle of life, I think, and tragic, but also, very beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Death,
Well,
death
you said,
brings life.
yeah, you said with each of these three that you felt something very strongly. It's like the feeling comes first. And I think that's a really important thing to point out. One of the things, looking at highly disjunctive, as you call them, or strongly disjunctive haiku, or any poems that are very oblique and difficult to access. I mean, John Ashbery being the famous example everyone pulls up. It reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever read, what was the book by Sam Harris? It's one of the books about religion. And he talks about, he describes his omelet as if it's a religious ritual, eating the omelet and like the, the avocado, and it's divided evenly, and these three represent the three parts of my soul. And he just goes on about how you could sort of take anything if you want to analyze it as a symbol. You can just sort of run away with it, which allows for a sort of falseness to be possible too. You could just spit together things. Like I could say, like glass mug, my femur dissolves. And then if we stared at that long enough and analyzed it in that sort of disingenuous way that Sam Harris does, talking about his omelet, we could start to make things up about my femur being the structure, that the bone that holds me up. It's the densest object in the human body, and the glass is translucent, which bends the light, and that's the light. And so we could really sort of take anything and analyze it to death. But I think the key here is that you're feeling something first. Am I right about that? And then you're trying to understand what that feeling, where that feeling might come from.
I think it's it's not that there's a haiku moment or an aha moment of realization. And that was a misnomer from the start, taken, I think, mistakenly from Zen Buddhism as maybe a beat poet idea. But there's definitely, the poems are so short that if you get them, or if you feel anything, it's a very instantaneous thing, and you could say the feeling happens before your intellectual mind, before you can start thinking about what it all means. You had something happen, and that's really a gift of the haiku form. I like what you said about you can just put together any old crazy language, and the left hemisphere, so to speak, will figure out some, insanity to have it get put together coherently. However, the sensual aspect, that's how, and I use the word embodiment or embodied. I think that's really key. If it's just a bunch of somewhat nonsensical, look how clever I am language, those are very uninteresting to me. And there is a lot of that. There's quite a bit of a misunderstanding, I think, of what disjunction is in terms of the power of that mystery. Like, something's got to hit you for sure, and I think it is a very sensual experience. And if that isn't happening for you, maybe it's just that poem isn't your taste, or that's fine, But these so-called progressive haiku or strongly disjunctive haiku are, I think, I wanted to bring them up because I think that people have, or a number of people just don't want to look at it. They just have a hard time with that. They just want, I want to just tell me about a pine tree in the meadow with a fawn, and it feels good to me. It gives me a feeling of purity and like that. No. And by the way, I mean, there is symbology in like a whale fall or that the ocean's quiet depths, but I don't think that's what's interesting about it, the symbols of it. So yeah, I tend to stay away from, oh, you had, that monster is really your mother in your dream, like that to me is very uninteresting. Particularly my lineage in depth psychology is really against that idea. It's very much against the idea of symbolic interpretation. Like James Hillman, one of his famous epithets is stick with the story, so that go further with the story, face the image or face that psychic phenomenon and feel it, go back into it and see where it goes and attend to it in the sense of being receptive, not trying to have the egoic idea like, well, like I want you to do this and tell me what you're thinking, but more like, what do you have to say? And I think that's appreciative you could say, it's sort of active reception. That I think I approach a lot of haiku that way, just being open to it. Yeah.
How do you know, though, if a haiku has that? Like, do you always know immediately? Have there been haiku where you read them and think there's nothing there, and then years later you read it again and think, oh, wait a minute, this is profound, Or is it something that hits you, because you talk about, I love that idea of poetry as consciousness, because if we think about what consciousness is, it's actually our sort of neural infrastructure, our brain plus the rest of our body too, speaking to itself. And that's what our consciousness is. So if suddenly I stub my toe, suddenly, my toe is screaming up into my brain. And that experience is
Right.
part of what consciousness is. And the, you mentioned the left hemisphere, that making models, and my right brain saying, no, that model's wrong, and arguing between the two is part of our consciousnand there's all these different, the hindbrain, the reptilian brain with our emotional impulses, arguing with our frontal cortex, all these things negotiating and communicating are our consciousness. That's what it is. That's what it sort of emerges out of. And then poetry is sort of the bridges across those things. It's something that incorporates the actual emotional thing of our heart, which is part of our body. Like, you feel things in your actual body emotionally. And then there's the symbolic understanding of things, like what the whale fall would mean as a metaphor. And then there's the literal thing too, is the construct of the left brain. And they're all negotiating itself, and poetry being the thing that bridges those gaps and speaks to all of them at once, I think is the thing that makes poetry so interesting. And I think maybe that haiku gets to the heart of, right? And so when you feel something, when you encounter haiku, you might not be able to explain it yet, but like some of those areas are talking to each other. Am I thinking of it in the way that you would say? Would you agree with that?
Well, it's pretty technical, Tim. But I mean, I actually address it to some extent in the early part of the book. Sorry, where I have a dialectical setup where I present this contrast between typology versus the perception of the unique. And typology meaning an egalitarian typology, where, like, for instance, if we have modules in our brain, like there's the, perceptual module, there's an emotional center, there's a, language part, there's a reactive part, there's a fight or flight, I'm not an expert in neurology, but if you think of these modules, that's a typology. And an egalitarian typology, it means they're all equal to each other. There's no one's better or worse. And the trouble with typological thinking is that it denies the unique, or it subverts the unique, because you end up categorizing. I call it slicing and dicing. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, that kind of thinking is absolutely instrumental. I mean, we can't, this is the way we learn things and know things, is by examining these things separately and seeing how they fit together. But the perception of the unique is, it's immeasurable. It is, you can't type it into any category. And so what I look for in a haiku myself is that freshness, is another way to talk about the unique. It's just fresh. Whether it's the language part, or, you can then get into it. Well, there's this language and it's working like this, and there's a symbol and it's working like that, and there's feeling and it came out like this, and so you can do that, and it's interesting to do that. This is not a bad thing, but I do feel that we, in our daily lives, we habituate ourselves to routines, and that one of the great powers of haiku is that they're incredibly dishabituative. They dishabituate you. They don't exactly shock, but they shift your habitual ways of reading, mm-hmm. and even of receiving meaning or feeling. And so that dishabituation or defamiliarization, it's not that it has to be sublime. It's not to say this is some ultimate superlative experience, but it's, as you said, it's like, does the poem end, or can you realize that, oh, this poem I thought was really not that interesting actually became more interesting? And there's a poem that popped into my mind. It's by Jim Casey, and unfortunately I I don't remember the exact phrasing, but I believe it was swallow flight, looking out the window long after. I'm pretty sure that's it. Swallow flight, looking out the window long after. And, I remember years ago, it's an older poem, and when I first read it, I thought, yeah, okay, well, I don't see what's really so interesting about that. I mean, typical experience. But then I realized, like, what is long after actually about? Like, does he mean like it could be? Yeah, I started to realize this could be like 20 years later. Or it could just be like later in the afternoon. Like, it could be like 5 minutes, because swallow flight is like so brief. And so he's playing with this, temporal, how would you call it? Not ineffability, but space. There's a temporal space that he used in a very indefinite way. And so I thought that's an example where that poem crept up on me for sure. I started to feel like, yeah, I just think it's beautiful that he could say all of those things at one time,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I pulled it up for everybody. So if you're listening, it's swallow flight hyphen or dash M dash looking out the window long after. Yeah, so I think he had that right, and it is a beautiful haiku. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It is, and the dash is really important there, and that would be called like kireji or a cut or disjunction, where it emphasizes that temporal gap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think maybe this discussion is leading into one of the, I think there's three main topics we wanted to talk about. And one is this concept of haiku sanctuary. And so you're talking about haiku as a sanctuary from habituation. Like it's the mysterious place we can go to get outside of what we've become habituated to, which is so much of our life. I mean, so much of life is routine. So much is like running the script of, I've made this dinner over and over again. I've driven to work. I don't even notice. There's all this stuff that's routine. The way we read and encounter things is routine. When you see, when you see oceans, you think depths and not deaths. And so that just
right.
shocks us out of the expectation. Is that what you mean by sanctuary?
So could you say a little more? How do you receive the idea?
Well, to me, I mean, that's what it is to me. It's that there's this sort of place that we live, which is structured by our expectation, I guess. And so much, and there's that whole idea of, retrocausal thinking, and so much of what we think we understand are like ad hoc rationalizations for like what our feeling was encountering it, So there's this way that we like project what we expect onto everything. And then breaking that is to actually see it again, and then, what was that? I don't know why I can't think of the movie. The Poets movie, and Robin Williams, he stands on the table,
Oh, that's right. I actually just saw that again like a few months ago.
Yeah. What is that called? Why can't I remember that? But anyway, everybody else knows that movie except us two.
Right. In the private boys' school?
Yeah, exactly. But that's the whole, you stand on your desk to see the world from a different view. And
right,
so
he jumps up on the desk.
Yeah, so that view, which you don't usually get from being 8 feet up instead of 5.5 or whatever, is the sanctuary from expectation. And that's kind of how I think about it. And then you can talk about, the sanctuary from all the news things we're bombarded with and all the, all that kind of thing too. But it's a sanctuary from that, a space outside of our out of the present moment and the time and the past baggage and the future worries. It's a space outside of all that. So it becomes a sanctuary for consciousness itself, I guess, to live and be free briefly.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this idea of sanctuary is so important. I think we need it. And I also feel that the idea of poetic sanctuary is an act of resistance, which I think we don't always talk about so much, that just the act of spending quiet, alone time in an undistracted or non-distracted way is a resistance to the extreme assault and accelerational days that we're living in social media and with the news and various hysteria and also real conflict going on. And it's not just that would necessarily absorb you, but I think it gets under your skin. And so what do we do about that, or how can we address that? And I think that, taking a vacation on the beach sounds nice, but we usually are too busy or we have too many responsibilities. And so it's an important question. I think it's a more and more important question. And I'd like to say two things about this. The first is I'd like to quote from Antonio Machado. I use this epithet translated into English, and he wrote, "Between living and dreaming, there is a third thing. Guess it." Mm-hmm. Between living and dreaming is a third thing. Guess it. And I talked about this as, I called it hypothetical humanity, or you could talk about it as poetic space, but that has other associations. But it's this idea that it's, we can enter into spaces of sanctuary that aren't fantasy. It's not just, oh, I'm just going to imagine things or I'm daydreaming. But at the same time, it's not literal. And it's a very hard space to define that space. I think of it as a creative space. That's one idea, concept, that there is a third thing between living and dreaming. Guess it, get into it, or what is that? Sorry. Gee, I'm not used to talking. Okay, so I'm going to be raspy. The other aspect that's interesting is more coming from depth psychology, and in the book I introduced the word temenos, not in a religious way, but in more the Jungian style way, which is, he has an interesting way of putting it. It's a protected space, but it's a protected space in which you can take risk. And I think that's a really key point of this, that sanctuary isn't a kind of way of closing yourself off and hiding from the world, or like erasing all of the concerns. That's part of it, I think, of course, because you want to have an architecture. This is part of this idea of sanctuary, that it's a real space. It's in a sense a marked out space. So maybe you have a walk in the woods or down a trail, or maybe you go into a room in your house, or maybe you just have a special place out somewhere where you can sit, and you feel that it's marked out for you, where there will be better chance of not being interrupted, let's say, and you can relax. But why? So from the Jungian point of view, he is interested in individuation, in the idea that as adults, we can work toward a deeper sense of ourselves and a greater sense of awareness. And I really think that's part of, for me, what the arts are about, that they encourage me in that way. And it doesn't mean that it's not a quantitative thing. It's not a measurable thing. It sort of more deals with uniqueness in a way. That what is the benefit of uniqueness anyway? What is the benefit of when you look at a stranger's face or your lover's face, and they're so completely different, but they're both unique? What is it? What is it about uniqueness that we tend to forget? That it's not just that there are faces. Faces is the typology part, but it's the uniqueness of that we can't put our finger on. And I think risk is involved with this too. That to go more deeply in sanctuary means that you have a protected sense, and you can delve into your own psychology, or into what disturbs you, for instance, or what feels like a risk for you. And one of the risks I feel is loss of self, or loss of self-identity, that we tend to hold on pretty tightly to who we are. But in my experience, especially in terms of poetry, that I don't really know who I am. And I'm now an older guy. And I've gotten more settled not with the idea that I know better who I am, but actually that I know less who I am. And it's slightly more comfortable for me now to accept that in a way. And who I am seems to come back to me as reflection in a way. Like it isn't not so much just a diving down, taking risks. Like I know I'm going to get the gold, I'm going to get the diamond jewel at the bottom of the pool kind of thing. It's more that through poetry, like through, for instance, in haiku, we're talking about between living and dreaming, there's a third thing. Guess it. Yes, but I can also read it. I mean, I can read that sense or get that feeling through haiku or through poetry. I don't know what it is exactly, and I'm not saying that is me as an ego, But again, it goes down to the root of mind as being metaphorical in nature. That to have more confidence in that, I think, is a very powerful thing. And that is related to having maybe more confidence as a poet or as a poetical being, as an imaginative being. That imagination isn't lesser than, that daydreaming even isn't lesser than. We have to take care of literal reality. We have to take care of, our health and our family and, all the things, make money. And it's not to say, that these things are not absolutely crucial, but I do think imagination gets a short shrift. And, I realized just recently, maybe in the last few years, in the AI sphere, it seems like there's been a greater call for quote unquote multidisciplinary creative thinkers, but our schools are actually producing more and more specialized vocational types of programs. I mean, there's a complete disjunction here going on. And if our future society is going to be perhaps, if the mundane tasks that are specialized and even highly professional can be handled by an artificial, I don't think artificial cleverness, I think, is really more than artificial intelligence is the proper thing. But if artificial cleverness really works, then what are we doing? And where is our value? And I think that what's ancient is new. I mean, what's ancient is the future. It's this holism. It's our embodiment. And so I feel like imagination, maybe if I'm a romantic, I have to admit it. I mean, I kind of stand with Wallace Stevens. I think Wallace Stevens never gave up on the romantic, despite his so-called impersonal style. I find him incredibly romantic, and I feel that that's what we are fighting for in a way. We're not fighting for a false romanticism. We're not fighting for the ivory tower poet who's drinking laudanum and destroying themselves with TB or something, as like some kind of romantic idea. I think that we need to have a more pragmatic romanticism. I think it's really important. So, I love what you do, and it's a bit different than me because I am a weirdly ivory tower person. I think I have trouble with other people, but through this medium of sharing poetry, I have a great love. And I just encourage people to dip into, there's 325 haiku in the book, and there's a lot of discussion about these things, the uniqueness and immeasurability, and I'm really trying to it's a manifesto. I'm taking a stand, and I think that it's not, the book isn't just for people who like haiku, I think the subtitle is creative explorations of the space of mind. And that's what I'm trying to articulate. That was my challenge, to try to articulate that. Yeah. So let me stop there.
Yeah. Well, let me say at this point, if you're enjoying this conversation, make sure you click the like button. It's always helpful. If you click like, then more people will watch it later. And there's always like twice as many people watching who have clicked like so far. So click like now and let people read it more or listen more. Also, if you have any questions for Richard, I'll pass them along. If you leave them in on YouTube or Facebook, just put question all in bold so I can see it as I scroll through the comments. There's two more things, and time just flies when we're talking about this kind of stuff, Richard, and we don't have tons of time left. But I want to talk about the two concepts that are sort of the aspects of what you get from sanctuary, I guess, or the value of that. And one is you describe it as the resistance, I think, hypothetical humanity as a form of resistance. And, and you mentioned earlier that it's a way to address the things that disturb you about the world, And so going to that sanctuary where it's at the space between dream and reality, where you can you're free to play with imagination, helps resolve things like that disturb you or unsettle you, and I guess that's maybe the point. But do you want to talk a little bit about that, about this as a form of resistance?
Yeah, it's probably partly that question is why it took, a couple hundred pages to articulate the idea. It's like a long thought. I do think it's important, and I wouldn't want to get it too wrong, but I do talk about this idea of architecture, and I want to go back to that a little bit. Like, the part of sanctuary is architectural. I want to read. I'll read. There's a section in the book on page 77 called mimesis, and this mimesis was not the René Girardian style of mimesis. This is more drawing on Mircea Eliade, and also that famous book by what's his name, Auerbach, titled Mimesis. And I wanted to draw on those, and I just wrote this at the beginning of the section. The relationship of sanctuary to architectural constructed spaces of the sacred plumbs the depths of human history. Mircea Eliade contends that sacred space and its taboos are proto-human. Sanctuary historically partakes of sanctity as a notion of place. Over the centuries, sanctuary has come to represent places of physical haven and safety. The Abrahamic religions each offer precincts, architectures that define and bound the sacred. In Christian tradition, the church or a part within it has long been considered a sanctuary, allowing for limited stays from secular punishment. In the Quran is the counsel. If one among those who are without knowledge of God asks you for protection and assistance, grant it to him. Escort him to where he can be secure. Within Judaic tradition, the temple, as a sanctuary of God, meant that gaining access to the temple gate was to gain access to the gate of sanctuary. 6 Levitical towns of refuge were established wherein one could claim the right of asylum. And I go on to talk about the theater of the sacred in relating to the early Greek drama. And I mean, into the present time, this all became secularized. And so, one little paragraph more, regarding sanctuary in relation to poetic dwelling, historical transitions have seen sacred space and sanctity evolve from religious into contemporary secular contexts. In the early modern era, Holderlin's passage, full of merit, yet poetically, man dwells on this earth, inspired Heidegger's phenomenological idea of the quote-unquote primordial poeticizing of being as an aspect of the holy. I just think that's a really, really crazy idea, what Heidegger popped in there. Primordial poeticizing. So that leads back to Eliade's idea of the proto-human sense of sanctity and sanctuary as being a sacred space. And then also he points out that primordial poeticizing is an aspect of the holy. And, you know, I don't want to, I do go on more about this, but he brought in the word holy or holiness. And I think that's really important, that it's not just that you can become mindful in a space that's comfortable for you and quiet. That would be a very, I guess, mundane idea. But you can see that in the background of these very important pundits or philosophers and anthropologists, that there's something really, really deep that is, I think, a lineage that we are part of. And proto-human, beginnings of theater, this idea of miming the creation, meaning not a creation in a religious sense, but the idea of recapitulating the creation story, recapitulating our own creation, but also that means the creation of cosmos too. That's part of that depth, and that's part of psychological depth. And I think we aren't able to touch into that kind of deeper, more oceanic thread, but that it's always available. And I don't also want it to sound too esoteric and mystical, because I think it's a really ordinary experience. And that's also really important. Magical in a way, but also just part of who we are. So I think that maybe every culture has its priorities and has its values. And I'm just advocating for this kind of possibility, that sort of as a way to remind that it's been, you can see it philosophically or in terms of the question of the history of what sanctuary means or what sanctity means, or even that there are taboos around like where you can go and not because it's so important or so sacred or special. Like the idea of defacing a church or synagogue or a mosque, is there's something offensive about that. Like that's a place of sanctity. It's an architecture. It's a dwelling. It's been made for that purpose. So, we have taboo is an interesting word. We don't usually like to bring that up in post-Enlightenment liberalism, but it's an interesting thing to also demarcate a boundary and say, yeah, I'm going to go here and other things are not, for this period of time or whatever. That's a mark of resistance. So it's not a resistance which is anti-establishment. Actually, it's not saying I'm for socialism and I'm not for capitalism or something like that. It's not an ism situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the uniqueness that your soul projects beyond the constructs or something like that we're talking about here, right?
I think when love is the best, if whoever's out there, if you've really been in love, if you've really had true intimacy with a partner, with another human being, then you know what sanctuary is. I think then you know what the sacred is in a way. And there may be other ways to describe it, of course, but I think that for me that's maybe one of the very best is we talk about soul to soul, and I think often that just go off on a slight tangent, but I think when you're often deeply in love with a partner or a partner for that time, and this is love. I'm not talking about sexuality as apart from love, but with, meaning firing on all cylinders, meaning, it's just a completely embodied thing. That there's this interesting question, but I feel like it's true. I feel like that you see that the loved one's brilliance. I feel like you see something of their enlightenment that they can't see or that they can't feel or touch. It's not just romantic superlative hyperbole. It's really deep there. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about sanctuary and about the sacred on this really human level. And I can also say one more thing, that one of the wonderful experiences after really good lovemaking, I think people use the word bliss, but this is something else. It's so ordinary. It's like you're just absolutely equanimous, together. And what an incredible experience that is to be with someone and have loved so deeply and to just be with. And so I want to, this is about feeling, and it's also about intimacy. So I don't want to be too abstract or intellectual with this idea of the holy, for instance, and what that is different for every person. But I wouldn't attach the word holiness to that. I think that the word holy there is insufficient, actually. I think it's better to read a poem about that, I'd rather the metaphors.
Mm-hmm. Well,
what is the mysterious place between living and dreaming? I think that's that's an area right there,
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's really well said. One more topic before we wrap it up. And it was Dick Westheimer says, there's so much about reading haiku here. What can we learn about the practice of writing haiku from Richard's work? And it would be great to talk about just a little bit about how to get to this place. We talked about how disjunction is this resistance to understanding that provides sort of a depth of emotion and consciousness. And so writing from that perspective, how do you get to a place that you're doing that? How do you approach, if you're trying that as a goal, what do you approach it?
Yeah.
And we have one poem at least that's a sample from you. So maybe you should read that and talk about that and how you got into that space for that poem.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I have to find those. Okay. Look, it's really, really easy. This is I think a really important question, because there is no need for anything but reading great haiku. If you just read a bunch of excellent examples that have been collected, you'll get it. It's not hard at all. Now, if you read them, you have to slow down your mind because they're so short. And so part of the difficulty is just in general, we're not used to extremely brief poetry being multi-layered and deep. So there are in my book, I list my own sources, which are anthologies. And I mentioned the Modern Haiku Press anthologies, Haiku 21, Haiku 21.2. There's also a book called Haiku in English, which is more of a historical overview. I have the book Disjunctive Dragonfly, but now this new book has over 300 haiku in it. And I mean, you would have like three or four of these sources would give you maybe a couple thousand haiku. And there are also more haiku on the Living Haiku Anthology, LHA online. They have like a few thousand. It's a mixed bag, but anyway, this is to me my own method, I didn't involve myself in some deep study of haiku to begin with. I had some resonance, or so I vibed with haiku, even though maybe they weren't even that interesting, but I was caught by the form early on. And the way I've learned is really by, I've interviewed and translated, exceptional genius-like talents here in Japan, and also found, to my delight, some really excellent poets in English, many actually. And just by reading them and appreciating, getting into what they are, because each one is unique, each one has a fresh experience, and it doesn't exactly build up, but it's like a richer and richer treasury or treasure trove. And I teach writing here in the university, and it's extremely hard to teach writing in English I'm an advanced second language learners of English, and part of the difficulty is that I think the way that you learn to write better is just by reading a lot, and it's extremely nonlinear, and it takes years. Like, how do you form a well-formed sentence, or and the way you think when you write is completely different than how like right now we're speaking, but I know that if we were writing what we're talking about, it would be very different. And sometimes it does seem to me that the wiser aspect of my being is in writing, not in speaking or in thinking even. I don't know where it comes from, but I'm impressed. I mean, sometimes like, oh, gee, I didn't, like, where did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
that experience
I think all
as a writer.
familiar with that experience, yeah.
Yeah. So you don't learn, maybe I'm being very contrarian to say that, I'm not being intellectual here. I'm just saying that the heart of it is in the poem, and the poems are actually accessible. And luckily we've had these really great editors have collected some very good, they've curated basically. And the curation is top notch. So that would be just go there. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I like this poet. Maybe they have a collection, or I could put their name into the search, or find out more about them, or etc. And it starts to link up and network out. But yeah, you don't need to take a course. You don't need to join any group. You don't need anything hardly except the work itself, I think, and just enough examples, and see what you think. And you'll usually, like, I don't know about you, Tim, but there's a very limited number of poems I really, really love. And that's true for haiku too, but I keep coming back to them. And I think that's what you look for. Like, you just look for what really, moves you and gets you. It's not that say, oh, I have this book, they're all supposed to be wonderful, so therefore I should learn to like them somehow. That wouldn't really work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, be selective. I mean, be picky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then that's it. Use that. To me, I maybe the advice, because I love reading before I write. Like, that's why I love the concept of the haiku sanctuary, because there is a sense of getting in the right thought space, as you say, for the creation of art, in this case poems, but like to get the words sort of rattling around in your head, and to have the sort of sense of the way thinking has to go in order to get to an interesting place. It really just reading a few and remembering what that I love the word sanctuary, like what that sanctuary is like. Like a great poem will take you to the sanctuary, And then once you're in that space, you can create. It's sort of spontaneous at that point, but it's a matter of like getting in the right headspace or thought space, as you put it. And then,
yeah. And there are also, in terms of practices, there are some interesting practices. Like one that I've tried lately, because it's just easy for me doing fun, is I have my smartphone mounted on a little telescoping arm, like near my bed. I mean, it's on mute and silent. It doesn't go on during my sleep. But if I wake up in a hypnagogic space, sometimes I'll wake up in a very hypnagogic space with like all kinds of like crazy images from dreams, and I'm just in that in between living and dreaming space, and I can turn on my phone and voice record into a memo, and just say whatever I want. And so I mean, the idea of writing a poem and making a haiku, sometimes it could be very editorial. Like I might look back over a lot of this material and go, oh, this is really interesting. Like the haiku begins to form out of that material. And this is not artifice. This is, I mean, lots of people write lots of things from this kind of you could call it brainstorming or free association. So, I mean, where do we start? You don't have to start by, I'm going to sit down and write a poem, or I'm going to sit down and write a haiku. On the other hand, by understanding the form and understanding what really moves you, what's powerful, or especially aspects of disjunction, semantic aspects, or misreading, I mean, those things do clue you in. And that, probably if we think of writing poetry in general, all of the means or practices of writing poetry just apply to haiku as much as anything else, So we're really not even talking about like how to write haiku anymore. It's more, what is it to just like enter into a poetic state of mind or space? And there's another one that I used to do a lot when I had a little more free time, but I used to have this practice where I was living in Boulder, Colorado at the time. I lived there for a couple of decades, and I would just say, okay, I'm gonna go to the center of town, which was not that big at the time, and I'm not going to do anything. And I'm just going to move where my body wants to go. And it was this idea of an unformed movement in unformed time, in unformed space. And I wanted to give myself a chance to experience like a completely non-directive, formless situation, but in real life. And, it was just, it wasn't like revelatory, but I did this like, like on a Sunday or, Sunday afternoon, whatever, for maybe an hour or two on various weekend Sundays. And it was just so interesting because, I found that I ended up walking to places that I probably wouldn't normally have walked to. It wasn't that it was profound, but it was just this interesting idea of allowing a different kind of approach to perception and movement and embodiment. So, I mean, probably there are a million different ways of playing with our being, our phenomenology, you could say, and I think that they all are creative. They're just interesting to break out of a habitual thing, like, oh, it's Sunday and I don't have any work today and I don't have any money, so I can't really go anywhere or do anything, so what should I do? I mean, that probably started from that, because I was, a broke bohemian for, until I was like 45, so, it was, a kind of an interesting thing, maybe somewhat forced by circumstance, so,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, let's we got to wrap it up, Richard. Let's close out with just sharing one of your haiku, and maybe we can let it sit in the mystery, and people can read it over again and contemplate it for a while.
Maybe I'll have they're so short. Can I do two?
Sure. Yeah.
All right, because one's more like what we were talking about just now in a way, and the other one isn't. So the one that reminds me of our just spoken topics is this one. The pause in self-similar nature, mist turns to dusk. And this one is in the book as a poem of resistance or social resistance, whereas loneliness is marketable.
Yeah, well, those are great. We can think about them, and but first feel the feeling, and then think about maybe why you're feeling the feeling. And I think that's a good cue into these more progressive haiku. Richard, it's so fun to talk. We could really talk for hours and hours, but we do have to wrap it up at some point. But it's always fun to talk. Hope we can talk again soon. Thanks for joining us all the way from Japan.
You're so welcome, and it's great to see you again, Tim. It's such a treat. I love what you're doing, and thank you so much. I have deep appreciation for you and Katie too.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Richard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once
all
again,
right, take care.
Yeah, take care. Yeah, once again, that was Richard Gilbert. You can find the new book that we were talking about the whole time, which is right here, Haiku Language Thought. Find that from Modern Haiku Press. modernhaiku.org is the website. Lee Gerger, that wonderful editor. Paul Miller, wonderful editor of the journal, Modern Haiku. It's definitely, I mean, we have copies like all over the house. They're our favorite, I think one of the only literary magazines we happily subscribe to. Do check out that. And those anthologies are wonderful too, that Richard was mentioning, all available from Modern Haiku Press, modernhaiku.org. Find that. And find Richard's book as well if you want to dive deeper, because really we could talk for days, I think, on this topic, trying to cover what's in this book. So do check all that out. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our prompt lines. And the prompt for this week was to write a poem that begins with an ordinary parenting event that snowballs into something more. So that's your prompt for this week. Write a poem that begins with an ordinary parenting event that snowballs into something more. If you've got a poem that fits that, please share it with us by joining the Zoom. I'm about to deploy the link on YouTube and Facebook. Join the link, but only if you have a poem to share. And before you do, email it to promptlines@rattle.com. That's promptlines@rattle.com. Keep in mind, too, we want everything to be short so we can get to as many people as possible. We have a hard deadline tonight of about 45 minutes from now, so we want to get quick. It's a one-page max, but also we want everybody under 3 minutes on camera just to make sure we get to as many poets as possible, so let's be mindful of that. And we'll be right back with a whole lot more poetry. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. I'm here with our prompt poems editor, our associate editor, and my wife, Katie Dozier. Also, we didn't even mention Heliosparrow. That's Richard's online journal.
I was a little disappointed that you didn't get to everything in an hour and 15 minutes. But
yeah, well, Richard does have a wonderful, if you want to find, the kind of avant-garde, he calls it progressive haiku. Heliosparrow is a great place, and Katie's got like 19 of them or something rolled up in the next couple days and weeks and months, I guess. I don't know how it's
He's rolling them out in series of 5.
He is, but she sent a bunch, and he was just like, let's run them all. Yeah, there's a lot of Katie there. One of the really the best haiku poets pushing things forward today. But that was not the prompt for this week. The prompt was to write a poem that begins with an ordinary parenting event that snowballs into something more. So what did you do with that, Katie?
Well, I was influenced in reading a lot of Richard Gilbert leading up to writing this afternoon. And, I'll read the poem first.
Okay.
It is a Haibun.
There you go. Okay.
American Girl. Come back before dark was never something that they said. In the forest, she brought her doll Kirsten instead. But when she held her hand, it pulled her whole arm out from her socket. She cupped Kirsten to her notebook as they ran to their secret shack. A wagon wheel in the center, the mossy seat where she read Frost, all underneath a refrigerator box teetering against a tree glittering with cicada shells. Still, she warmed her hands on the fire she didn't yet know how to build. Toadstools, all the things I try to bury, toadstools.
Well, very cool. And so I'm curious, how Richard's sort of philosophy entered into this. Also, interesting, I know for a fact that you wrote this on your bicycle because you told me you stopped to write the haiku.
You're right. I wrote the haiku before,
so
which almost never happens.
You wrote the haiku first, too.
I did edit the haiku, though. And so first I had it as mushrooms and I had it as a monoku. But I was thinking a lot about the Scott Metz haiku that we looked at about come to and flowering and that one and the disjunctiveness there. And that made me think about how if I put the toadstools up above it, I could make it circuitous. Like it's like you want to read it before the main second line, but you also want to read it again. And the whole point is that they keep popping up. So I was able to find a way for it to incorporate with that. Cause I was really thinking about that Scott Metz haiku and we talked about it a lot. So.
We did. Yeah. Trying to suss that out.
Yeah. And then I was also influenced because the Haiku Society of America had a conference, which was online, making it a lot easier to attend. And Roberta Berry, who of course was a recent guest too, was on there talking about a shift in perspective and how she really likes to see third person bodies of Haibun. And so I actually wrote it in first person and then realized I could have a temporal and person shift kind of by making it in first person in the haiku. So
yeah, well,
it's very influenced by this weekend's activities, I suppose.
It's all the leaps that spark.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, very cool. Yeah, American Girl. It was Katie's
Should have
poem.
brought my American Girl doll down, though, too, for this episode. She's honored up there in the closet, wishing my daughters like to play with dolls.
Yeah.
Sorry, I say bitterly. Carla's laughing. She knows what I'm talking about. Okay.
Yeah, I haven't seen them in such a long time. That's
well,
why I was trying to remember where they
again.
even are.
I'll show you. She's up there. She's awesome.
Aw.
All right.
Okay. Let's go. So my poem, I'm doing these what's called alliterative verse sonnet-y things. This is containers. When the visitor vanishes, we send a van to the corner store to count the cartons of milk. Most of the men who go missing slip out for something as simple as cigarettes. Only then it's off to Ohio. Only then comes the knapsack full of knickers nodding on a gnarled stick. Stop with the staring, they sometimes say, but we never started. That's all it takes. No tantrums, no tying their hands or stuffing their heads in a hood. What they want more than women or water is not to be noticed for a nautical mile. To evacuate every atom, to evaporate altogether like the surface of the sea to the safety of the sky. To drift invisible, inviolate, uninvolved. Watch them condense into clouds of commitment. Watch them fall from the family of fog. We catch them. That's why they can't call. So there's containers from that book I'm working on.
That's really interesting.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And just, I don't know, just goes off in its own direction from where I started your prompt. So
yeah, you let it do it. I don't know that either one of us gets a gold star in terms of following the prompt this week.
Not really, but you follow it where it goes. The haiku, you go to the haiku sanctuary.
It is
you build the architecture.
Yeah.
And then you,
somewhat ironically too, I wrote about a sanctuary, not even thinking that I internalized
you
things.
definitely
It's
did.
odd,
Yeah.
but
Well, those words came up a lot when we were talking.
yeah, they sure did.
They did. All right. So let's see what everybody else has for us this week. And let's start with none other than Dick Westheimer.
Hello, all.
Hi.
Hey, Dick. Great to see you.
It's good to get a unusual taste of poetry motivation tonight, as usual. I have a longish poem, so I'm just going to jump in.
Okay.
Okay. Weaving in beads and ribbons and hanks of hair. I never took walks in the woods with my mom or dad, though every year after dad died, I took my mother to the cemetery on Montgomery Road where we'd stroll among the ancestors. Mom turned into an old Yenta, though she never used Yiddish with me, except for Gesundheit, which was Yiddish-ish, and tchotchkes, which less high-class Jews displayed on their coffee tables. We were not like them, shuckling as they prayed their names like hers before she married, betraying their Slavic roots. We were upper crust, which I guess meant she was free to gossip. Uncle David wasn't a war hero after all, and Aunt Minnie was cruel and not just to the help. Grandpa's cousin Samuel stole money from the company till, and that story about Uncle Irv and Albert Einstein, it's only partially true. But I loved those walks because at 85 she was still weaving me into the long braid of our family, each story a small bead laced in, and me just one ribbon among the hanks of hair. My children wink at each other when we walk in the woods, when I repeat these stories enough that they've numbered them. And as from years from now they're out hiking with their grown kids, I see their fingers plaiting me in when I'm no more than Jude's brown eyes, Remy's dimpled chin, and a ribbon of stories to hang on to.
Well, that's a beautiful story. Great telling, Dick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Looking forward to hearing the rest.
Thanks, Dick.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much.
Yeah, bye.
Dick Westheimer with Weaving in Beads and Ribbons and Hanks of Hair. Let's go next to Carla Schwartz.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I'm glad to be here. I have a high bin, and I will get to it.
Great.
Here we go. And just say I'm not a parent, so this is how it came. I'm a plant parent. Because I garden, you build me a greenhouse. In spring, I plant the seeds in the waist-high trug. With my fingers, I sprinkle, I push, I press, shifting the soil to cover the seeds. I start early in March with peas and radish seeds, maybe a week later for lettuce. The beans don't go in until May. I set up the drip irrigation after we're cleared for frost, but I'm not good at feeding, no good at weeding. Not good at weeding. I leave my bereft garden to chance. I've always called myself a haphazard gardener. We usually do get some peas until the plants brown up in the heat of summer or that get cut off at the stems by grubs. I grew 2 of the biggest, roundest radishes this year, though. In the fall, I had some beans growing up the stakes and 1 big fat carrot, small joys. But the garden never yields enough to really feed us. You observe me year after year, tending the garden, attending to my house plants, trying to keep everyone alive when I'm away most of the summer. You watch me and think I care, think this is love, think I would want plants on a much grander scale, and begin your plans for an indoor farm and nursery. Think that I wouldn't be overwhelmed by learning new techniques, but I've watched I've watched the old soil go stale, watched pests invade a crop, watched you apply for the permit, hire the screw pile drivers, helped you support the cantilevered room with long boards in brackets. I watched as the excavators came and dug, built mountains of sand in the yard, laid and constructed the forms, and poured the basement walls, cut the hole for the door between the existing basement and the new, poured the basement floor. This greenhouse project, bigger than both of us. It's a slow project. 4 months we lived with a big hole in front of the house. 8 months later, we are almost ready for the glass. I'm grateful for the time it takes. I'm afraid of what I'll have to learn when we finish the glass house. You'll leave it to me, the growing. Great expectations. Plant parenthood, too late to abort.
Well, really interesting
Thank
haiku at the end of that. Thanks so much for sharing that, Carla.
Thanks, Carla.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was Carla Schwartz with Because I Garden, You Build Me a Greenhouse.
If I start gardening, will you build me a greenhouse?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. Does deadheading a rose every few months count as gardening? Okay.
Do we want a greenhouse? Maybe
I would love a
That'd be cool,
greenhouse.
actually,
I would
yeah.
grow vegetables.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, sorry.
Okay. Well, next up, let's go to Amanda Harris.
All right. As you guys were picking, I was thinking to myself, they're not going to pick me. They're not going to pick me. Yeah, I was a little surprised. So I'll just get right into it. Oh, so I think I'm just going to title this poem, Go Home. Okay. Go home, wags the finger that outgrows its shape. Shape, when you think about it, is a disease of the finger and a pox for the mind. I tease my child with go home, assuming she knows that my body language is a joke. My grandpa was good at telling jokes that weren't jokes. When kids cried, he'd say that he'd give them something to cry about. It was miles away from go home, but somehow I relate. Home is a seat. Home is a breaking continent. Home is the narrative of a spirit told in waves. Home is injustice. Home keeps going.
Very nice. I always love when you kick into a repetition.
I know, me too. Like the way you propel in the poem, it feels like rocket fuel. Like I know we're on this ride. It's very exciting.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much
Thank
for
you.
sharing, Amanda.
Thanks.
Yeah. There's Amanda Harris with a Go Home is what she's calling it. All right. Next up, let's go to Jared Campbell.
Hello.
Hey,
Hey,
Jared.
Jared. Great to see you.
Yep. Good to see you. So I've got a sonnet about the time when my son was still a baby. Lullaby. I spend my midnights polishing a noun I hope will shine if set within a sonnet, but every time I make some progress on it, cries interrupt and I defer renown to comfort you. Then back to work. I'll forge a crown of sonnets fit for Sisyphus to wear on this attempt to scale Parnassus. You cry, and everything comes rolling down. Third time tonight. Repetitive as rhyme, you're howling a complaint I can't conceive. We dance until the music slows your breathing. Our shadows on the wall keep common time. You sleep. I set you in the crib and leave. I'll miss these nights when you're no longer teething.
Aw,
Yeah,
how
very
sweet.
very sweet.
Really.
I love the rhymes in that too.
Yeah,
There's
they're
some
really
great
nice.
ones in
Yeah,
there.
there are. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Jared.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jared Campbell with a lullaby. Let's go next to Matt Joseph.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, Matt, great to see you.
Hey, great to see you as well. I was thinking, I think almost every ordinary parenting moment for me becomes something else. So this is great. So, all right, I'll just get right into it. So, taking my daughter to college. I spent your formless first years knowing I needed to be with you, spending time because I wanted to, but also I whisper through an open window to the slanted hummingbird that carries shameful secrets to weave into its winter nest. Because I was supposed to, and my father never did. There, I thought, that will show him. Then there were the bright middle years, when you began to take in strands of color beyond the grasp of my dwindling rods and cones, and you asked if I believed in God, and I knew I was in trouble in the best way. After that, you stuck your keys in the ignition and brought the engine to life, pulled beets and jicama from the earth and fed those close to death. You marched, spun vinyl, turned the tables, and made me shake hands with new books and new bands. You used your bony elbows to make a place at the table for anyone smaller than you. I am smaller than you. You, who I began loving because it seemed the right thing to do, but who is dug in so deep now that saying goodbye feels like I am severing my hand. I know I am smaller than you because my face fits against your shoulder, which I am bawling into, a shameless hitching river of snot and tears, hearing your voice miles above me, telling me it's going to be okay.
Yeah, another very sweet poem.
I love the bony elbow detail. That was very fitting with thinking about the kids' table and Thanksgiving and everything like that.
Oh, yeah. Snuggling with my daughter was like snuggling with a protractor. She's just a cute animal. So, yeah.
That's great.
Anyways, yeah. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a line for a poem, too.
Yeah,
thanks,
you got to
Matt.
put that in. That is really good. Yeah.
Matt Joseph taking my daughter to college. Next, let's go to Shivpreet Singh.
Hello, how are you guys?
Hey, great, Shiv. Great to see you.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. I have a poem about when my daughter taught me how to make a paper dragon.
Oh, neat.
So here it is.
Okay.
How to make a paper dragon. The lamp pulls light. I hunt for words, but she pulls me from my desk and shows me how to fold a paper square. Her hands are small, her creases certain. Breathe, she says, and wow, a paper jaw bites with my fingers. Fold the wind, it seems to whisper. Can you allow your mind to follow? We reverse the crease, the sheet bows to its maker. This is how a dragon sits, all angles on my palm. I tap its throat. A small fire escapes somehow, warming our room more than any poem. It's been centuries. I wonder how.
Yeah, well, again, I love the through rhyme in that.
Yeah,
and
it's
then that
really
line,
nice.
can you allow you, or wait, no. Fold the wind, it seems to whisper. I love that description.
I also
that's
have
from
made
the
paper
that's from
dragon.
the Gita. I took it from the Gita, so I'm stealing.
Paper dragons. I think Lizzie, my daughter, has made 100 of them. I'm not sure. She became super obsessed.
Yeah, kind of like, I don't know, maybe she made 6, 7.
No, you're not allowed to say that. No.
It's kind of, I mean, it was a craze, though, the dragon.
It was
dragon
very
mask
serious.
craze.
I think
yeah.
it maybe carried more meaning. But I guess.
Sometimes 6 feels like 1,000. It does.
It does.
Well, thanks, Shiv.
Yeah.
Great
thanks.
seeing you guys.
Great seeing you.
Shivpreet Singh with How to Make a Dragon. Next, let's go to Brian O'Sullivan.
Hello.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, Brian.
Good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you.
Okay. So I this will be less sweet than many of the poems tonight, I think. I picked a very bad parenting episode from mythology. There is a sanctuary in it, kind of.
Nice. Okay.
Nice. Redeeming.
Cronus has his kids and eats them too. Cronus spares a little spot of time where he can meet his dear beloved progeny. He bounces lightning's god upon his knee and teaches autumn's queen to tend her vines. He cuts this small, still pond of time away from the tedious stream of months and seasons, so he briefly may forget the treason, the slaughter that plays out on his darkest day. In a static spot, he loves his babies. He gives a foamy steed to young Poseidon, and on the surging waves they go out riding, his tender, awful arms enfold sweet Hades. Outside the spot of time, the god devours his little ones, those juicy gobs of meat. It is the only way that he might beat that destined seizure of his regal power. His feast, we must admit, is ordinary. It's just how primal parenting is done. But that spot where a father loves and doesn't run, that shines amid God's bloody deeds. Extraordinary. When vengeful Zeus returns to spill his blood, he tries to shelter in his sacred spot, but finds it gone. He cannot unknot time's chains or drain its ordinary floods.
Yeah, well, beautiful rhymes interwoven in there too. I love the form, Brian.
I also feel like, Brian, you need to write a Greek mythology rhyming dictionary. Like, you're the man to do this for the world.
Get right on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
very
Brian.
fun as always, Brian. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Brian O'Sullivan with Cronus has his kids and eats them too. All right. Let's go next to Laura Berg.
Okay, I'm in the same camp as Brian here in less successful parenting moment. Selfish Mama. Remember when the goose came charging at us, puffed to look so mean, and you swung me up and held me out in between yourself and the goose like an offering? My lovely grown daughter asks. Me with silky curls in my rose dress with the satin bow, an innocent kid shielding you, a grown woman? Remember, Mom? Maybe I was evil from the get-go. Maybe I shouldn't babysit the grandkids. I'd be like Daedalus and say, try on these wings, and then take pictures of them falling. Selfish Mama. When I'm by myself, my whole body of cells busy composing among themselves, I can choose to sit in my garden on a blue willow drum and watch the moonflowers open.
Yeah, what a beautiful turn at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Laura.
Thanks, Laura. And 2 weeks in a row. It's been a while since you've been 2 weeks in a row, I think.
Yeah.
To keep up this. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. There's Laura Berg with Selfish Mama. And next, let's go to Tina Denniclaw.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi, Tina.
Did it undo already?
It
'Cause
did, yeah. Great to see you.
You can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so that mine is long. So Dad's turn. Bright turquoise fiberglass with metal paddle, hand crank, and a stainless steel 1-gallon cylinder. My parents' tradition whenever close friends came to visit. Dads took turns churning homemade ice cream, moms cooked, and children played. Dad's good friend Bob at the State Department slipped into Dad's office, sat down, and began to chat. After a bit, Dad queried, "Been nice talking to you, Bob. Is there something I can do?" "Nah, I just needed to pass some gas, and I didn't want to do it in my office." Informal competition for best joker, and it was now Dad's turn. Bob and his family came to dinner. Mom prepared the ice cream base, put it in the cylinder, and closed it up. "I'll get that," Bob insisted. "You can take it when I'm tired." An hour's work ahead. Bob cranked and cranked and cranked. "It doesn't seem to be freezing. Is there salt on the ice?" "You bet," my dad was certain. "I put it on myself. Maybe if you crank faster." Another half hour and Bob was whooped. "Well, let's see." Dad opened the lid. No paddle. Mom forgot to put it in, not by accident. Dad wins and we all eat rock hard frozen ice cream.
Almost a literal snowball.
I know, that's what I was thinking. That's very funny.
Nicely done.
Yeah.
I try to follow directions.
That's great. Thanks, Tina.
Sure.
Yeah, it was Tina Denenclaw with Dad's turn. And next, let's go to Rob Harris.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, Rob.
Hey, Rob. Yeah, great to see you.
Thanks for having me on. I saw, I guess, on your Facebook page, you had recently met Billy Collins, and so I was channeling, I guess, my inner Billy Collins in here, and I'll never be the writer that he is, but I had fun with this, and I guess that's reason enough to do it. This is called Neighborhood Ice Rink circa 2002. I'll preface this with I am the proud dad of two beautiful girls, and they're grown now, but I hope they don't take this in a mean spirit. It wasn't meant that way. It goes like this. Taking my older daughter ice skating for the first time could easily have been confused with bad parenting for the way that she screamed and cried and protested so much. But 2 decades later, with all the outgrown skates and the discarded costumes from her and her younger sister's synchro teams, and the unused and unwanted team jackets, and the pins from the trading that always happens among young girls, and the medals and souvenirs from competitions held in various cities and states, and the untold miles put on the car going to and from the ice rink for practices, and the many, many hours spent in providing transportation and other forms of support, and the significant amounts of money given to various skating coaches, I now realize just how much that one afternoon really mattered. And I hope their own kids will one day have something just as meaningful.
Well, that's sweet turn at the end too, Rob. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to it.
Yeah. That was Rob Harris with Neighborhood Ice Rink, circa 2002. All right. And we're kind of rushing through the open lines, but that's going to close out the Zoom.
Yep.
Let's go to Ted Bernagolvera, see what he had for us today. And Ted sent this high shelf. We'll see what he's got. Okay. Your high shelf. Nico Robotic Puppy. Point, no, point, point. No, no. Tantrum, tantrum. Cry tantrum. Lift, carry outside Walmart. Boring parking lot. No more tantrum. Nico forgotten. All right, so there's some parenting lessons in there. The high shelf robotic puppy. Thanks for sharing that, Ted. Fun as always. And that's going to wrap up the prompt lines for tonight. So what do you have for a haiku?
Oh, I forgot which one I put because I wrote a lot of haiku.
You did write a lot of haiku, yeah. So this is one of my favorites.
Oh, that's why I picked it because you said
it was really good. I like it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Congress Avenue, the chattering of bats.
Yeah, so we did go to Austin and to meet Billy Collins, hang out with him, and his book release for his new book, Dog Show. He's going to be the guest in 2 weeks. Yeah. And my favorite thing in Austin are the bats underneath the Congress Avenue Bridge. I only saw them once before when I went for the 2007 National Poetry Slam was there. And someone was like, you got to see the bats.
I've never been there because I know we're only a few hours away from Austin, but I've only lived in Texas for like 4.5 years or something, so I hadn't been before. But it was amazing. I also have to say the Harry Ransom Reading Room at the University of Texas is absolutely incredible. If you ever wind up in Austin, make a reservation and go, and you can do things like read William Carlos Williams' early notebooks at Harvard and crazy stuff. So
yeah, really cool. And maybe, there's probably other things like that, other libraries that have rare collections of things. It's something I never even thought about being cool to visit.
Yeah, I know. It was like absolutely amazing. But although we're never going to top that experience because we were reading Billy Collins' archives when Billy Collins walked in, and nothing else in my life will be as ironic as that.
It was very strange.
It was
a strange moment when he had to
It was really great. And he was so funny about it, though. He was like, what are you reading? Oh, God. Anyway, what's your haiku?
Well, you did the bat, and I had a bat one too from that.
I was thinking you might have a bat one.
Yeah, too. I figured I'd share the bat one too, so we could compare bat notes. And here was mine about the bats down there. Bats under the bridge, an eyelash. There you go.
Funny.
There you go. Bats under the bridge, and an eyelash. That's
funny. I bet if you asked people which one of us wrote each one, people would think I wrote that one and you wrote the other one.
Well, I was trying to go a little farther with my, disjunction things to read about.
Disjunctive.
Yeah, there you
That's
go.
true.
Anyway, that is on my haiku for this week, that's going to wrap up the show for this week. Now, what is next week's prompt going to be, Katie?
Next week, a little bit of a longer one.
Okay, take a deep breath.
Okay. Write an ode to something personal to you without it becoming a personal poem, i.e. a poem that only carries meaning to a very select group privy to a specific knowledge. So longtime listeners will understand the concept of the personal poem, especially those that come to the critique of the week on Fridays.
Yeah,
which
definitely. And then if you want to find it, and maybe in some archive somewhere, there's an issue of Writer's Digest that includes my article on public and
I didn't know you had an article on personal poems.
2005 or something.
That sounds
yeah.
exciting.
I know, really.
Okay.
But yeah.
Anyway, I think it'll be a good opportunity for us to look for the universal in what's intimately related to us and good practice for poems in general. So I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to that. So, So once again, the prompt is write an ode to something personal to you without it becoming a personal poem. So I'm looking forward to that. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Great.
All right, and the guest next week is going to be Jeff McRae. Now, Jeff, I don't even know, he probably doesn't know this, but Jeff McRae wrote the first poem that I ever read as a submission and was like, whoa, that's awesome.
Really? Wow, that's quite the detail.
I know. It was his poem Jeopardy from issue number 23 when I just first started out. I started out with a 22, but we were reading for 23 at the time and came across, and I was like, damn, that's poem is fine,
Wow, that sounds like quite the moment you had.
I know, I did. So, and so he's been publishing, every few years. We get a new great poem from Jeff McRae. He's never had a book until now. So his new book is The Kingdom Where No One Dies, which is out not too long ago. He was also most recently in our Musician Poets issue. He's a musician as well as a poet. And looking forward to getting to know him better. He's had a lot of great poems over the years. That's Jeff McRae, episode number 320. That's Monday, December 1st, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week. In the meantime, we'll talk to you later. Good night.
Good night.
Oops. Wrong music. There we go.